At Starbound, we tell stories the human way, not with artificial voices or AI garbage. And what's HFY without humanity? Subscribe to keep it that way. I'm Daniel Pierce, and I'm going to be your narrator. Now, let's get into today's story. Waking up typically happens by degrees. You float up from the depths of sleep, drifting through layers of consciousness until you break the surface. Waking from cryo sleep after 5 centuries defies that gentle transition. It resembles resuscitation after drowning in a frozen lake. Jonah Hill lacked knowledge of his relic status. The end of the war remained a mystery to him. He knew only that his blood felt like slush, his lungs tasted like copper pennies, and a hydraulic vice seemed to squeeze his skull. The universe manifested as a blur of aggressive, sterile white light that stabbed directly into his optic nerves. His body convulsed. A thaw, a violent reboot of a nervous system dormant since the siege of terror, took hold. His heart hammered against his ribs, a heavy, erratic thudding that sounded too loud in the quiet room. A muscle cartilage in turning over in the library would make less noise. Reflexes engaged. A soldier waking in a combat zone relies on the lizard brain. Threat assessment, mobility check, a weapon. He felt constriction across his chest and arms. Restraints. He was a prisoner. Jonah bypassed thought. He ignored tactical assessment or the consideration of diplomatic ramifications. He reacted. He filled his lungs with air, expanding his chest, and jerked his arms inward to test the bonds. He braced for the resistance of a military-grade nylon steel weave, the kind that leaves deep bruises. Instead, a sound echoed like a dry twig snapping under a boot heel. Snap! Ping! The restraints disintegrated. The force of his sudden expansion shredded the polymer straps. The metal anchor points, drilled into the wall behind him, shrieked as they ripped bodily from the composite material. Debris showered the pristine floor. Jonah sat up, gasping, the remnants of the straps fluttering from his shoulders like confetti. He swung his legs over the side of the pod. His boots hit the floor. Cling! The heavy resonant sound vibrated the floor plates under his heels, sending a tremor through the entire platform.
Medical breach. Restraint failure. Level 5 containment is gone.
The high melodic voice carried a heavy weight of terror. Jonah blinked, his vision clearing. He saw the room. It lacked the brushed steel and concrete of a coalition medbay, featuring instead sleek white instruments that appeared to be made of spun glass and fiber optics. And people occupied the room, or beings resembling people. They stood tall, and nervingly so, and incredibly slender, with skin the texture of velvet and large dark eyes wide with horror. They wore white robes that shifted colors like oil on asphalt. They looked like bipedal stick insects wrapped in silk. One of them, a creature holding a datapad as thick as a sheet of paper, backed away, trembling. He broke the polymer, the alien whispered. The material is rated for a Grok's beast. Put him back! Put him back! Jonah grabbed the edge of the cryopod to steady himself. The plastic rim crumpled under his grip like a soda can. He looked at his hand, then at the crushed plastic. He had applied only enough force to hold on. Where? Jonah's voice came out as a ruin. It sounded like gravel tumbling in a cement mixer. It scraped his throat. He coughed, a racking sound that seemed to shake the walls. Where is the lieutenant? The alien scrambled back further. One of them pressed a panel on the wall, and a klaxon began to wail. Jonah attempted to stand. This action proved a mistake. His muscles were primed for Earth gravity, one solid G of force constantly pulling them down. His proprioception, the internal sense of how much force to apply to move a limb, remained calibrated for a world that wanted to crush him. The gravity here felt uncanny, floaty. It felt like 0.4 Gs, maybe less. It resembled the gravity found on a terraformed moon or a cheap space station. He pushed off the floor, expecting Earth weight. He launched himself upward with explosive force. He overshot his intended standing height by 2 feet, his boots leaving the floor entirely. He drifted up, flailing, and slammed his shoulder into the metal door frame of the medical bay. Crunch! The metal buckled. A dent the size of a bowling ball appeared in the frame. Paint flaked off. The structural beam groaned. Jonah stumbled back, his equilibrium spinning. He reached out to grab a medical trolley to catch his fall. His fingers closed around the handle. The trolley failed to stop him. He took the trolley with him. The handle bent into a U shape under his grip. The cart flipped over, sending delicate glass vials shattering across the floor. Ugh! Jonah grunted, trying to plant his feet. He felt like he was walking on a trampoline. Every movement generated too much output against insufficient resistance. Turn the gravity on. The door hissed open, or tried to. The dent in the frame jammed halfway. A security team squeezed through the gap. They were slightly broader than the medical staff, wearing sleek, color-shifting armor that looked like beetle shells. They raised their weapons, slim, elegant rifles that hummed with a high-pitched whine.
Halt!
The lead security officer chirped.
Submit to sedation procedures immediately.
Jonas shifted his stance. He dropped into a combat crouch, his center of gravity low. The movement was fluid, heavy, and predatory. The floor plates groaned under the shift in weight. He looked at the guards. They looked fragile. A punch in this gravity would send one of them flying across the room to stick to the wall. The security team flinched. They had clearly never seen something move with that kind of density.
Wait! Don't fire!
A smaller alien pushed at the guards. She, Jonah assumed the gender based on the voice, wore a blue sash over her robes. She looked terrified, her large violet eyes darting from the twisted doorframe to Jonah's massive shoulders.
You'll stop his heart!
She yelled at the guards.
Those stunners are calibrated for Grossumer nervous systems. Look at him. He's a brick of condensed carbon. You might as well just throw pebbles at a tank.
She turned to Jonah, raising her hands, palms out. Her fingers were long and delicate, like spider silk.
Please,
she said, her voice trembling but clear.
Cease movement. You are breaking my infirmary. You have already destroyed a diagnostic cart worth more than my annual salary.
Jonas stared at her. He straightened up with extreme care, avoiding a hard push off the floor. He felt like he was walking on eggshells. Who are you? Jonah asked. And why is everything in here made of tinfoil? The alien swallowed hard.
I am Ulo, chief xenobiologist of the salvage vessel Kite. The equipment is standard Duraplast. You are heavy.
I'm standard, Jonah grunted. He looked at the guards. Tell your plastic soldiers to lower the toys before I take them away. Ulo gestured frantically to the guards.
Lower them. If he decides to throw something else, he will haul the ship from the inside.
The guards hesitated, then lowered the weapons. They looked relieved. They wished to avoid a fight with the dense, angry anomaly. Jonah looked around the room, assessing the threats. Everything was sleek. Curves, touchscreens. No bolts, no rivets, no welded seams. It seemed like an industrial facility designed by people who had never heard of a hammer. Salvage vessel, Jonah repeated. The words sank in. My ship, the Sovereign. Where is it?
Docked,
Ulo said quickly.
We are docked to it. You were recovered.
Recovered? Jonah tested the word. How long? Ulo looked at her datapad, then at him.
The carbon dating on the cryo fluid, the star charts. The Sovereign has been drifting for 512 standard years.
The room fell silent. The only sound was the hum of the ventilation and the soft crunch of glass under Jonah's heavy boot. 500 years. The war was over. The lieutenant was dead. His squad was dead. Everyone he had ever shared a beer with, fought with, or loved was dust. The earth he knew was history. Jonah felt a hollow pit open in his stomach. It was a cold, bottomless feeling of displacement. But then the pit growled. It was a loud, guttural sound, like a tectonic plate shifting. The vibration traveled through his body and hummed against the floor. The nearest medical tech actually jumped. Jonah clutched his stomach. The metabolic demands of a human waking from cryo were catastrophic. His body screamed for fuel to restart the furnace. Food. Jonah rasped, his composure cracking under the biological imperative. I need calories now. Ulo watched in a mixture of scientific fascination and absolute horror. They sat in the mess hall. The table was a lightweight composite that bowed visibly whenever Jonah leaned on it. Jonah had cleared the first 3 crates of emergency rations. These were nutrient-dense protein blocks, dry, flavorless squares designed to sustain an active Grossumer deckhand for a full day. Jonah ate them like a starving wolf eating bone marrow. He tore the wrappers open with his teeth, swallowed the blocks whole, and reached for the next one. He drank water by the liter, crushing the thin plastic bottles in his grip once they were empty. More, Jonah said, slamming a fist down. The table creaked alarmingly.
That was the emergency supply for the starboard watch,
Ulo squeaked.
You have eaten a week's worth of provisions. Your caloric intake is currently sufficient to power a small shuttle.
It tastes like sawdust mixed with chalk, Jonah critiqued, wiping crumbs from his beard. But the shaking stopped. Do you have anything that wasn't made in a lab? Meat, vegetables, anything with a cell wall?
We have algae paste,
Ulo offered. Jonah stared at her. Pass. He looked up at her. His eyes were intense, dark, and predatory, but a sadness lived deep under the brow ridges. 500 years, he muttered. Who won? Ulo blinked.
Won?
The war. The Terran coalition versus the Hive. Ulo tapped her datapad, searching the historical archives.
The Hive. The biological incursion of Era 8. The records are fragmented, but the humans are listed as precursor extinct. It says Terra was classified as a death world and quarantined.
Jonah laughed. It was a dry, barking sound. Extinct, yeah, that sounds like us. We probably blew it up, taking them with us. The door to the mess hall slid open. A tall Grossimer strode in. He wore a captain's insignia and carried himself with the rigid tension of a man watching his profit margin eat all his supplies.
I am Captain Spindle, he announced, and you are eating my profit.
Jonah looked at him. He remained seated. He chewed slowly. I'm the cargo.
You are a salvageable biological asset found on a derelict,
Spindle said, trying to sound authoritative. He stayed well out of arm's reach.
According to Maritime Law 88C, unclaimed biomass is the property of the salvage crew. We intend to sell you to the Xenology Guild.
Jonah stopped chewing. He swallowed. The silence stretched, heavy and dangerous. Sell me? Jonah said.
Yes, Spindle said. You are a relic, valuable, fragile perhaps considering your early era biology, but
fragile. Jonah stood up. He did it slowly this time, controlling his ascent. He towered over Spindle. Jonah was 6'2", a dense wall of muscle and bone trained on a world with 1.0 G gravity. Spindle was tall, but built like a wading bird, hollow bones, efficient, delicate. Jonah took a step forward. Spindle took 2 steps back. I'm not a vase, Captain, Jonah said, and I'm not for sale. Now, I'm going to my ship. You're going to open the door, or I'm going to make a new door. Spindle bristled.
The docking tube is sealed. The airlock on your vessel is rusted shut. Our cutting lasers are still calibrating. Manually opening it defies physics.
Jonah smiled. It was a smile devoid of warmth. Show me. The corridor leading to the docking tube was narrow. Jonah had to turn his shoulders slightly to avoid scraping the walls. Ulo and Spindle followed him, keeping a safe distance. They arrived at the heavy blast door connecting the kite to the Sovereign. The kite's door stood open, revealing the umbilical tunnel. At the end of the tunnel stood the airlock of the human Ark ship. It was a massive slab of dull steel, pitted and scarred. In the center was a manual override wheel the size of a manhole cover. It was orange with rust fused to the locking mechanism by centuries of cold welding and oxidation. It looked like it belonged on a submarine, not a spaceship.
You see, Spindle gestured. The electronic interface is dead. The mechanism is seized. We need plasma cutters.
Jonah walked down the tube. The air here smelled different, metallic, old. It smelled like home. He looked at the wheel. He touched the rust. It felt rough and real. He tried to turn it. It was solid rock. Spindle was right about one thing. Muscle alone wouldn't break that seal. Physics was physics. Atmosphere? Jonah asked without looking back. Ulo checked her sensors.
The Sovereign has emergency atmosphere. Stale but breathable. But the door...
I need a lever, Jonah said. He looked around the docking tube. It was a Grossimer structure, built for lightness, but a maintenance handrail ran along the wall.
It was a hollow alloy tube bolted to the bulkhead. Jonah grabbed the rail. He placed a boot against the wall. "Hey!" Spindle shouted. "That is structural!" Jonah ignored him. He pulled. The bolts groaned. The metal composite wasn't designed for this kind of sheer force. With a sharp crack, the rail tore free from the wall. Jonah held a 6-foot length of alloy pipe. "Cheater bar," Jonah grunted. He walked back to the airlock wheel. He jammed the pipe through the spokes of the wheel, bracing it against the center hub. It gave him 5 feet of leverage. "It is unfeasible," Spindle insisted. "The strength of the rust alone." Jonah planted his feet. He grabbed the pipe, took a breath, and visualized his core. He pulled with more than just his arms. He dropped his weight, engaging his legs, his back, his glutes. He used the pipe to multiply his force. His sound echoed through the tube, a high-pitched scream of tortured metal. Flakes of rust exploded from the joint like shrapnel. Spindle's jaw dropped and Ulo gasped. Jonah roared, a burst of explosive power. Crack, thud. The seal broke. The wheel jerked a quarter turn. Jonah removed the pipe. He grabbed the wheel with his hands now that the seal was broken. He spun it. It ground against the housing, protesting every inch, gritty and loud, but it moved. The heavy steel latches inside the door retracted with heavy, satisfying thuds that vibrated through the floor. Thud, 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 thud. The door groaned and swung inward. Jonah stood there, chest heaving, hands covered in rust dust. He looked back at the Grossamer crew. They looked like they had just watched him rewrite the laws of thermodynamics. "Doors open," Jonah said. Before he could step across the threshold into his past, the kite shuddered. Red lights flashed in the docking tube. An alarm blared, a different one this time, urgent, rhythmic.
"Proximity alert!"
Ulo yelled, tapping her wristcom.
"Capital class signature! It's a cruiser!"
Spindle's face went from gray to white. "Sledge, the Dredge Warlord." "Pirates?" Jonah asked, wiping his hand on his pants. Competition, Spindle stammered. "Hostile scavengers. They claim this sector." The intercom on the wall crackled. A voice boomed through the speaker, deep, distorted, and heavy.
"This is Warlord Sledge of the Iron Tusk. You are docked to my salvage, little bird. Detach immediately or be crushed."
Spindle tapped the comms panel.
"We have a legitimate claim. Concordant Registry 449.
"I have a railgun,"
Sledge replied.
"My claim is heavier."
There was a pause. Then the voice returned, sounding interested.
"Wait. My scanners pick up a biological anomaly on your ship. High density, massive heat output. You found a primate."
Spindle froze.
We change of terms," Sledge growled. "Keep the scrap. Give me the beast. My mining guilds need heavy labor, a creature that dense can pull carts in the gravity wells where my drones fail. Give me the livestock and you live."
Jonah walked back down the tube. He loomed over Spindle, pressing the comms button with a thumb that covered half the panel. "Who are you calling livestock, ugly?" Jonah said. Silence on the line. Then a deep, rumbling laughter.
"It speaks. Good. Intelligence makes them work harder before they break. You have 5 minutes, Captain. Send the beast over, or I open fire."
The connection cut. Spindle looked at Jonah. "We have to surrender you. It is the only logical path. His ship can vaporize us." Jonah looked at the ceiling, then at Ulo, then at Spindle. "Logic," he muttered. "You people and your logic. You're going to give me up?" "To save the crew," Spindle said, trembling. "It is the needs of the many. The weave dictates it," Ulo added, though she looked sick. "Survival is the primary rule." Jonah shook his head. "Not where I'm from." Jonah squeezed onto the bridge. The ceiling was low and the chairs were too small. The panoramic view screen showed a massive, blocky ship hanging in the black. It was ugly, covered in spikes and armor and plates. The Iron Tusk. It looked like a flying brick factory.
"He's locking weapons."
The technical officer shouted. Shields? Jonah asked. Kinetic barriers are up, Spindle said, but they are designed to deflect micrometeors and energy dispersion. A railgun slug is a solid mass. It will punch right through. So move, Jonah said.
We are docked!
Boom! The ship rocked violently. A warning shot clipped the port stabilizer. The impacts sent the Grossamer crew flying. They tumbled out of their chairs, flailing in the low gravity. Spindle hit the console face first. Jonah didn't fall. He planted his feet, bent his knees, and rode the shockwave like a surfer. His density was his anchor. Inertia was his friend. When the shaking stopped, he was the only one standing.
Damage report.
Spindle moaned from the floor.
Hull breach in engineering.
Willow shouted, pulling herself up.
Primary coolant loop is ruptured. The plasma exhaust vent has jabbed open. It's flooding the corridor with waste heat.
Temperature? Jonah asked.
Critical. It's venting at 70 degrees.
Jonah frowned. Celsius?
Yes, Celsius.
Ulo screamed.
It will cook us alive if we don't seal the manual bypass. The reactor goes critical in 4 minutes.
Spindle was sobbing.
We cannot enter. We have no heavy thermosuits. At 70 degrees, our proteins denature. We will die in seconds.
Jonah did the math in his head. 70 degrees Celsius was roughly 158 degrees Fahrenheit. That was hot. It was a very aggressive sauna. It was dangerous, sure. You wouldn't want to live there. But for a few minutes... Is the air toxic? Jonah asked. Chemicals?
There are trace sulfur compounds,
Ulo said.
Irritants, but the heat...
Give me a respirator, Jonah said. I don't want to cough.
You don't understand.
Spindle yelled.
It is death.
Jonah walked to the emergency locker and grabbed a standard filtration mask. He strapped it over his face. He stripped off his jacket, revealing a gray tank top that showed off his arms, scarred from a dozen campaigns. Stay here, Jonah ordered. He ran. He reached the engineering deck. The heat hit him before he even opened the door. He opened the hatch and stepped inside. It was like walking into a wall of dry fire. The air waved with heat distortion. Jonah's skin instantly flushed red. His pores opened and sweat began to pour off of him. To the Grossamer, this environment was instantly lethal. Their biology couldn't regulate temperature this fast. They would go into shock and boil. Jonah Hell was an extremophile. He was built for the Kalari. He was built for the jungle. He grit his teeth. Hot. Damn hot. He squinted through the heat haze. He pushed forward, his boots clanking on the deck. He could feel his skin tightening. His heart rate spiked as his body worked to cool itself. He reached the manual bypass wheel. It was hot to the touch. He hissed, pulling his sleeves down over his hands to grip it. Come on, he grunted. He cranked the valve. It spun. The venting hiss died down. He stood there for a moment, panting, sweat dripping from his nose and sizzling on the floor plates. He wiped his forehead. He felt lightheaded, but alive. He walked back out of the engineering bay. Ulo and a damage control team were waiting at the bulkhead, wearing light suits, terrified to enter. When Jonah emerged, red skin, drenched in sweat and radiating heat like a furnace, they recoiled.
He lives,
one of them whispered.
He functions in the fire.
Jonah ripped the mask off. Valve's closed. Get the AC running. I need water, a lot of it. The ship didn't blow up. Sledge was disappointed.
Stubborn.
The warlord's voice came over the comms.
You sealed the leak. Impressive engineering, but I am done playing.
He's launching boarding torpedoes.
The tactical officer screamed.
Crunch.
The kite shook as the 3 massive metal pods slammed into the hull, piercing the cargo bay.
They're inside,
Spindle cried.
We surrender. Tell them we surrender.
Jonah was in the mess hall again, chugging a liter of water to replace the fluids he had lost in the sauna run. He looked at the ceiling speaker. Surrender, he repeated quietly. Ulo was with him. She was trembling so hard her teeth chattered.
It's the only way, Jonah. The dredge are strong. They are miners. They have gravity crushers. We are scientists.
So? Jonah crushed the empty plastic bottle.
So we have 0 probability of victory.
Jonah looked at her. Ulo, let me tell you something about humans. We don't care about the odds.
We care about the principle. And the principle is, get off my lawn. He looked around the room. He needed a weapon. He opened a maintenance locker. Inside was a heavy-duty spanner, a wrench about 2 feet long made of solid alloy. To the Grossimer, this was a two-person tool. Jonah picked it up with one hand. He waited. It felt light, but solid enough to crack a helmet. Lock the door behind me, Jonah said.
Where are you going?
Ulo grabbed his arm. Her hand was so light he barely felt it. To renegotiate the contract, Jonah said. Lock the door. Don't open it unless you hear a knock in Morse code.
I cannot let you die.
I'm not planning on it. Jonah stepped into the corridor. Ulo stood there, hand hovering over the panel. Her conditioning told her to run, to hide, to submit, but she looked at the steam still rising from his shirt. She hit the lock button. The dredge were big. They were hulking creatures encased in thick, vacuum-sealed environmental suits. They looked like bipedal rhinos in spacesuits. They carried shock mauls, rods crackling with electricity that could stun her nervous system from across the room. 3 of them occupied the forward corridor. They moved with plodding, unstoppable momentum. Jonah stepped out from behind a bulkhead. "Hey!" he shouted. The dredge turned. Their helmets had glowing slits for eyes. "The beast," one of them grunted. "Subdue it." They charged. Jonah analyzed the physics. Gravity was still 0.4 Gs. If he stood still and threw a punch, the equal and opposite reaction would send him sliding backward. He couldn't generate power from the floor. He needed to anchor himself. He looked up. A conduit pipe ran along the ceiling. Jonah jumped. He grabbed the pipe with his left hand. He hung there for a split second, a pendulum of dense muscle. The lead dredge swung the shock maul. Jonah swung his body. He used the pipe as a fulcrum, lifting his legs and driving both boots into the dredge's chest plate. Cling! The impact was devastating. In 0.4 Gs, the dredge had mass but very little weight holding him down. Jonah's kick transferred all his momentum into the alien. The dredge flew backward as if hit by a truck. He smashed into the 2 behind him, and they all tumbled down the corridor in a tangled mess of limbs and armor, crashing into the far wall with a noise like a dumpster falling downstairs. Jonah dropped to the floor. He didn't wait for them to recover. He moved in. He swung the spanner. He hit the first dredge in the helmet. The alloy crumpled. The visor shattered. The alien went limp. The second one tried to stand, raising a maul. Jonah stepped inside the guard. He didn't punch. He shoved. He placed both hands on the alien's chest and pushed. The alien flew backward 10 feet, slamming into a bulkhead. The third one scrambled back, dropping his weapon. He looked at his fallen squad mates, then at the small, soft-looking pink creature standing amidst the carnage.
You are Dins,
the alien stammered in broken common. I'm just getting warmed up, Jonah said. Tell your boss to come down here himself. Jonah retreated to the secondary blast door. He couldn't hold the corridor forever. There were too many of them. He needed a choke point. He sealed the door to the command deck. This was the last line of defense. If they got through here, they had the bridge. On the other side of the door, he heard heavy machinery, a grinding, whining sound. The tip of a massive hydraulic spreader poked through the seam of the doors. It was a machine designed to pry open geological faults in mines. The jaws expanded. The blast door groaned. The metal began to bend. The lock was failing. Jonah looked at the door. He knew he couldn't hold it. He wasn't a machine. He wasn't a superhero. If he tried to hold that spreader closed with his bare hands, his arms would snap like dried twigs. 10 tons of force was 10 tons of force. But he had tools. He looked at the heavy spanner in his hand. Physics, Jonah muttered. He waited until the jaws opened just enough to expose the gearing mechanism of the hydraulic arm. He lunged forward. He jammed the spanner directly into the exposed gears of the spreader. The gears bit into the high-density alloy of the wrench. The motor shrieked. Sparks showered the room. The wrench didn't break. It was solid tool steel. But the gears were high-tolerance alien tech. They stripped. The machine seized, the jaws froze, jammed open a few inches, but unable to open further. Jam it up, Jonah whispered, stepping back. On the bridge, Spindle and the crew watched the security feed in silence. They saw the human jam the machine. They saw him outthink the brute force.
He stopped the crusher,
Ulo whispered.
He broke the machine.
Spindle stared at the screen.
He saw the sheer obstinance of the human. "He is not just strong," Spindle murmured. "He is adaptable. He changes the battlefield." The concept was alien to the Grossimir. Procedures were absolute. To Jonah, everything was a suggestion. Watching the human fight a mining machine with a wrench sent a shockwave through the crew's psyche. A spark of something dangerous. Possibility. Pop! Smoke poured from the motor of the spreader. It was dead. But the dredge were miners. They had explosives. Boom! A shape charge detonated on the hinges. The explosion threw Jonah backward. He flew across the room, slamming into the far wall. He hit hard. His head cracked against the metal. He slid to the floor, ears ringing, vision swimming. Through the smoke, the door fell inward. Dredge spraders poured in. A dozen of them swarmed. Jonah tried to stand, but his legs were jelly. He fumbled for his radio.
"Hello. Again. There's too many. I need eyes. Where are they?"
Silence.
"Hello. Tell me where they are."
On the bridge, Ulo stood by the tactical console. Her hands hovered over the controls. Procedure. Non-combatants cannot participate. If she gave him coordinates, she became a combatant. She became a target.
"Make a choice!"
Jonah's voice roared over the comms, raw and desperate.
"Be a victim or be a crewmate!"
Ulo looked at Spindle. Spindle looked at her. He nodded. Ulo slammed her hand onto the console.
3 hostiles, flank left. Ventilation access.
She shouted into the mic.
2 more coming from the cargo lift.
The contagion spread. A Gossamer technician, a young male named Bex, saw a dredge raider trying to pry open the bridge access panel on the feed. Bex looked at the fire extinguisher on the wall. He grabbed it. It was heavy for him.
For the ship!
Bex squeaked. He ran out the side door. The dredge raider turned, surprised to see a soft one charging. Bex swung the cylinder with both hands, eyes closed. Clang! It hit the raider in the knee joint. The armor buckled. The raider stumbled. Bex didn't stop. He hit him again. It was clumsy, panic-fueled violence, but it was resistance. The crew was fighting back. Jonah heard Ulo's voice and grinned through the blood in his teeth. "Copy that," he whispered. He forced himself up. Suddenly, the gravity vanished. Sledge had cut the artificial gravity completely. The room went to 0G. The debris, the smoke, the dredge raiders, everything floated. The Grossimer on the feed flailed, helpless, spinning in the air. The dredge raiders, heavy in their suits, drifted clumsily, trying to engage their magnetic boots. Jonah Hell smiled. He had spent 3 years in the orbital drop corps. 0G wasn't a hindrance. It was a playground. He kicked off the wall. Bam! He launched himself like a torpedo. He flew over the heads of the dredge, grabbing a ceiling rail to pivot. He swung around, grabbing a floating dredge by the ankle. "Going down!" Jonah yelled. He spun, using the alien as a flail. He smashed the dredge into another raider. The force of the impact sent them both spinning into the far wall. Jonah moved like a spider, bouncing from wall to ceiling to floor. He struck from every angle, a punch here, a kick there, using the momentum to propel himself to the next target. He was faster, more agile, and meaner than the heavy miners.
Hull integrity,
Ulo warned over the comms.
Jonah, watch your drift. You're going to punch a hole in the ship.
"I'm being careful," Jonah lied, throwing the dredge into a control panel. The cargo bays hissed open. Sledge floated in. He was huge. He wore a suit of powered majestic armor, black and gold, with hydraulic pistons on the arms and legs. A heavy plasma caster was mounted on his shoulder. He magnetized his boots, clamping onto the floor with a metallic thud.
Enough,
Sledge boomed. He aimed the plasma caster. Jonah was floating near the ceiling. He saw the weapon charge, a ball of blue sun. If he dodged, the shot would hit the hull behind him. It was thin aluminum. It would blow the ship open. Jonah grabbed a floating cargo container lid, a slab of reinforced plastic. He pulled it in front of him just as Sledge fired. Zap! The plasma bolt hit the shield. The plastic melted instantly, slagging into boiling goo. The heat seared Jonah's forearm, singeing the hair and blistering the skin. He gritted his teeth, suppressing a scream. He didn't let go. He abandoned the impact, drifting backward.
You are strong,
Sledge said, walking forward, his magnetic boots clinking.
But you are flesh. I am steel.
He raised a massive hydraulic fist. Jonah discarded the melted shield. He looked at the warlord. Steel breaks, Jonah said. He kicked off the ceiling.
He didn't aim for Sledge's front. He aimed for the space above him. Jonah soared over the warlord's head. Sledge tried to turn, but the power armor was slow, heavy, and grounded by the magnetic boots. Jonah landed on Sledge's back. He wrapped his legs around the warlord's waist, locking his ankles. He grabbed the external hydraulic cabling that powered the suit's neck and arms. These were thick, reinforced hoses carrying high-pressure fluid. Sledge thrashed. He slammed his back against the wall, trying to crush Jonah. Bam! Jonah's head snapped back. He saw stars. He spat blood. But he didn't let go.
Get off!
Sledge roared. No. Jonah grunted. He dug his fingers under the cabling. He braced his feet against the armor's hips. He pulled. He didn't try to crush the metal. He attacked the connection. He screamed. It was a primal, animal sound. The sound of a death-world predator exerting maximum effort. The cables stretched. The metal fittings groaned. Grip. A spray of green hydraulic fluid erupted like a geyser. Jonah tore the main power coupling clean out of the socket. The suit died instantly. The limbs froze. Sledge was trapped in a statue of his own armor. He toppled forward, crashing face first onto the deck with a sound like a falling bank vault. Jonah rolled off, gasping for air. He floated for a second before grabbing a handle and pulling himself to the floor. He bled from a cut on his head. His arm was burned. Every muscle in his body felt shredded. He picked up a discarded shock maul. He limped over to the immobilized warlord. Sledge lay there, unable to move his heavy limbs. The Gossamer crew began to peek into the cargo bay. Spindle, Ulo, Bex. They floated in the doorway, watching. In their culture, the logic was simple. The victor eliminates the threat to ensure zero probability of future conflict. It was the math of survival. Jonah stood over Sledge. He raised the maul. Sledge closed his eyes.
Strike,
he rumbled.
I am defeated.
Jonah looked at Maul. He looked at the crew. He looked at the alien. He swung. Crack! He smashed the locking mechanism on Sledge's helmet. The visor popped open with a hiss. Sledge gasped, breathing the ship's air. He looked up, confused. The maul hadn't crushed his skull. Jonah dropped the weapon. It clattered on the deck.
Get off my ship.
Jonah wheezed. Sledge stared at him.
You spare me. Why? You have the strength to kill.
Jonah wiped the blood from his mouth with the back of his hand. He offered that hand to the warlord. I'm tired, Jonah said. And I don't want to clean up the mess. Sledge looked at the hand. It was small compared to his, soft skin, scarred. But he knew the density behind it. Slowly, painstakingly, Sledge accepted the grip. Jonah braced himself and hauled the armored alien into a sitting position. Sledge looked at Jonah, then he looked at the Gossamer crew, who were holding fire extinguishers and wrenches. The warlord nodded slowly.
You are not livestock,
Sledge said gravely.
You are a warrior, and your pack,
He looked at Ulo.
is sharper than they look.
He tapped his comms.
All units, withdraw. The salvage is contested by a superior force.
The dredge left. They dragged their warlord back to their ship and detached. The kite was a mess. Holes punctured the walls, scorch marks marred the deck, and the mess hall smelled like ozone and sweat. But they were alive. Contract complete, Spindle said, sinking into his captain's chair. He looked exhausted. Not quite, Ulo said, looking at the sensor board. Concordant peacekeepers just dropped out of warp. They responded to the distress beacon. The screen lit up. A sleek white vessel held them. An official-looking Gossamer appeared on screen.
This is Peacekeeper Vessel Harmony. We scan heavy weapon discharge and unauthorized biological signatures. You are harboring a Class 5 dangerous bioweapon. Surrender it for containment immediately.
Jonah sat on a crate in the background, a medic applying a gel patch to his burn. He looked up, tired. I'll go, Jonah said quietly. He stood up. I've caused enough damage. I don't want you guys getting fined or arrested. I'm a relic anyway. He walked toward the airlock.
Sit down, Jonah,
Spindle said. Jonah stopped. What? Spindle stood up. He smoothed his robes. He looked at the peacekeeper on the screen. His voice shook, but his chin was high.
We have no bioweapon,
Spindle said.
Captain,
the peacekeeper warned.
We can see the density readings. It is a primitive combat organism.
Spindle corrected, his name is Jonah Hale. He is the chief engineer of the kite, and he is under the protection of the ship's employment contract.
Ulo stepped into the frame, standing next to Spindle. Then Bex, then the rest of the bridge crew.
He saved us.
Ulo said fiercely.
Logic dictates that we owe him a life debt.
The peacekeeper blinked.
This is highly irregular. A contract with a death welder.
He opens jars for us,
Ulo said with a straight face,
and reaches the high shelves.
Spindle forwarded the data logs.
Review the footage. He defended the ship against a dredge warlord. He is not a weapon. He is essential crew.
The peacekeeper reviewed the logs. They saw Jonah jam the press. They saw him spare the warlord.
Very well,
the peacekeeper said, sounding baffled.
We will update the registry. Kite, proceed on your course. And try to keep your engineer from breaking the furniture.
2 weeks later, the kite drifted in deep space, undergoing repairs. Jonah was in the engine room. He held a massive hyperdrive strut in place with his shoulder while he welded it with his free hand.
Alignment looks good,
Jonah grunted. Ulo watched from a safe distance.
You are spot welding structural supports. That adds weight.
It adds stiffness, Jonah said.
Next time we get shot, the engine won't fall out. I call it human engineering.
Is that a technical term?
It means add more struts until it stops shaking. Jonah finished the weld. He slapped the metal beam. It rang solid.
I fixed up the spare room,
Jonah said.
Dial the gravity plates up to 1G.
We know,
Ulo said.
We call it the crusher. No one goes in there but you.
It's just normal gravity, Ulo. You should try it. Builds character and bone density.
I enjoy my bones the way they are, thank you. Long and not crushed.
Jonah sat in the mess hall. The table had been reinforced with steel beams welded to the legs. The chair was a custom job built from spare hull plating. He looked out the viewport. The stars were different than the ones he remembered. The constellations were wrong. Earth was a myth. But he was here. Ulo walked in. She carried a tray. On it was a large metal cup.
New formula,
she said, sliding it across the reinforced table.
Nutrient slurry, triple density, chocolate flavor, or what the synthesizer thinks chocolate is.
Jonah smiled. Thanks, Ulo. He picked up the cup. He was distracted, watching a nebula drift by. He was thinking about the future, about being a man out of time. His grip tightened just for a fraction. Crunch. The metal cup imploded in his hand. Brown slurry exploded, splashing over his hand and onto the table. Jonah froze. He looked at the crushed cup. He looked at the mess. He sighed deeply. I barely touched it. Ulo stared at him for a second. Then she laughed. It wasn't a polite, gossamer titter. It was a full belly laugh.
I'll get the mop,
she said, wiping her eyes. Jonah looked at the stars, then at his slurry-covered hand. He chuckled, shaking his head. I'm awake, he whispered to the infinite dark. And I've got work to do. The kite's engines flared, blue and bright. The ship turned, no longer just a fragile bird, but something stronger. It jumped to hyperspace, carrying the strongest creature in the universe. A free man.